Hello, my name is Dr. Courtney Johnson. I'm the CEO of Johnson Learning Systems. And today we're going to be talking about another standard out of our third grade math book, Math Fluency and Problem Solving. And today we're going to be talking about how to represent fractions using objects and pictorial models. Now, in the state of Texas, this skill set is represented by the standard 3.3a. The standard states you need to represent fractions greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1 with denominators of 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8 using concrete objects and pictorial models, including strip diagrams and number lines. Now, I'm going to break it down into a few different parts so we can understand the whole standard. We definitely want to understand the whole part. The first thing I'm going to recognize for you in this next slide is represent fractions. That's the first part we want to represent of this standard, is represent fractions. We need to understand what the word represent means. To represent means to show. You're going to represent. We've already talked about that in some of our older standards. So to represent means to show. So you're going to show a fraction. That's what represent fractions means. The second part we'd like to talk about is after we represent fractions, it's going to be we're going to represent fractions that are greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1. Now, what does that mean? Fractions that are greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1. On this next slide, I'm giving you an example of what this standard is talking about. Now, pay attention to the number line at the top of the page. It is not represented by anything. However, we have broken it up into two different parts, and we have broken it up in half. Now, if you look at the square below the number line, it is broken up into halves, and we labeled it as halves. Now, let's look at the next number line. On this next number line, we have represented something on this number line. We have represented a fraction. The fraction we represented is 1/2. Now, again, look at the square right below the number line, and we are representing 1/2 again, because one part of the square is shaded and the other part is not shaded. Now look at the circles right below the square. Two circles, one is shaded, one is not shaded, 1 out of 2, which means 1/2. You will definitely see these types of examples when you're working with problems. Now let's move on to a different type of fraction. Now we are representing 2/3 on this number line. Now, if you look below the number line, we have the square again, and we have it broken up into 3 different parts, and we have it 2/3 of this square labeled. Now look below the square, and we have 3 circles this time with 2 of the circles shaded, and it is representing again 2/3. Moving on to a different fraction, a different number line. We are representing 3/4 on this number line. If you look below the number line with the square, we have it divided up into 4 different parts, and it is labeled, and we have 3 of the parts shaded, which means we are representing 3/4. If you look below the square and you look at we have 4 circles, 3 of the circles are shaded, which means 3 out of the 4 circles are shaded, which means we are representing 3/4. Now let's move on to the next part of the standard. As after we represent fractions greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1, we're going to have to do that with denominators of 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8. Now, the denominator, as we've shown earlier, and you've learned in previous lessons and in previous grade levels, the denominator is at the bottom. What I have right here, I have some fraction cubes, and they're also can be called fraction strips. And if you look at these, I have the denominators that they're talking about. It's talking about denominators with 2, 3, 4, 6, and 8. All of these models, all of these are less than 1. And you're seeing how one whole is bigger than each piece of these fractions. So these fraction pieces are less than the whole. Now let's moving on to the next part is using concrete objects and pictorial models, including strip diagrams and number lines. And you know, we just work with strip diagrams, and these are also called fraction cubes as well. And trying to understand what these are fraction strips, and they are also concrete objects, because it says using concrete objects, or, and as you're looking at the slide, pictorial models. This slide contains pictures. This is a pictorial model. So we have concrete objects, we have pictorial models, we have strip diagrams, and we also have number lines, which you're looking at on the slide. So you have seen every part of this standard we have covered. Now let's move on and let's look at some problems, some star word problems that look like what this standard represents on the test. Now let's look at this first problem. It states Alec colored pentagons for a social studies project on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. What fraction of the pentagons did Alec color? Now, this is a problem where you are having to recognize what fraction is represented. We just showed you with the circles. This time we are using pentagons, and you're seeing how you're going to be able to represent and understand how to represent that fraction with your answer choice. Moving on, this is another question. Look at the figure below. What fraction of the base 10 blocks is not shaded? So you have to be careful to look out for that word not, because it didn't say the number that is shaded. It said the number that is not shaded. So you definitely want to go back and make sure that you read the problem carefully and make sure you do not get tricked by words like not. Now, that is the end of this, and if you have any hunches or your wonderings, go back and watch this video again, and it will hopefully give you enough repetition to help you understand. Thank you.